You heard Kathy reference in her children's sermon Paul's letter to the Ephesians. Our Tuesday morning Bible study is doing Ephesians and just finished chapter 4. All the chapters in Ephesians obviously have something wonderful to say. Ephesians 4 has a whole lot to say near the end about what Kathy talked about forgiveness, about the fact that we all do get angry, and that's not a bad thing. It's how we handle the anger that matters. And so what Paul says in our scripture today really is putting a bow on that entire argument. And he says in verse 29b of chapter 4 these words: watch the way you talk. Say only what helps. Each word a gift. Don't know if you all are really familiar with National Public Radio and what they do every Tuesday morning, which is to issue a story and put it on their podcast as well, called Unsung Heroes. I commend it to you as a wonderful discipline to get you to think about those folks in your life who have really just shown up at a time when you needed them to. This week's story was particularly phenomenal, showed up exactly when I needed it to show up, to remind me of the importance of unsung heroes. It was late 2012, 11 years ago, and Laura Eshelman was in the middle of what she describes as a mental health spiral. The love of her life had just dumped her. She was struggling with an eating disorder. She was having trouble finding work. This is what she said: I was leaving a downtown business where I had yet another job application rejected. I was feeling down. I decided to go to the Whole Foods store across the street. As she crossed the street, Eshelman noticed a man asking for money on the street corner. His unkempt hair and clothing made it seem like he'd been living outside for quite a while. She watched as he asked passerby after passerby for change, but was ignored by the masses. As I approached, he turned to me, she said, asking if he could have a little bit of money. I don't remember my exact response to him. I'm glad I don't remember, she said, because what I do recall is that whatever I said was very unkind and very harsh, something to the tune of, leave me the hell alone. I don't have anything to give. Bug off. Eshelman continued into Whole Foods, and as she walked the aisle, she noticed herself feeling distracted, really rattled. I couldn't quite put my finger on it until the realization of how rude and awful I'd been to this person hit me like an anvil, she said. I remember thinking, what the hell have you become? Who are you? She left her groceries behind and she rushed outside to find the man. I hustled over to him, she said. I began apologizing profusely. I dug out some change that had, of course, been at the bottom of my pocket the whole time, she said. As she handed it to him, the man took her hand in both of his. He looked deeply into my eyes and he said, you do know it's going to be okay, don't you? And for the first time in a very, very long time, I felt like somebody was seeing and hearing my own pain. And I started to cry. They stood together for a few moments before parting ways. She never saw the man again. If he were here right now, she said, I would tell him that that moment on the street was the glimmer that made all the difference in an extremely dark period in my life. For the first time in a very long time, I felt like someone saw, someone heard my pain. You know, as a pastor, I spend an inordinate amount of time crisscrossing the labyrinthian halls and highways and byways of hospitals and hospice centers where pain and its formidable sparring partner promise make the rounds. I've camped out in waiting rooms, much like the one on the front of your bulletin. I've held hands and led fervent prayer for healing. I baptized a 2-hour-old baby who died in my arms. I've been pummeled by a grieving mother of an 8-year-old boy who died in a bicycle accident. Her guttural shrieks of why and no, no, no still haunt me today. Waiting rooms are testing grounds for what you really, really believe about God's promises when push comes to inevitable shove. For my money, waiting rooms are life's best teachers. Listen closely. You'll learn all you need to know about faith and about life itself. I remember like it was yesterday traversing the terrain of the intensive care unit at Lynchburg General Hospital in Lynchburg, Virginia. My mother-in-law, whose name was Betty, whom I affectionately called Betty Bop, had been resident royalty in the ICU for 2 weeks, reeling from COPD complications and a brand new severe cancer diagnosis. On this particular Sunday, Betty was 48 hours removed from a flurry of chest compressions and a flatlined EKG. Her adult grandsons, my boys, the writer-to-be, the priest-to-be, held each of her hands. To speak in that moment would be to profane the silence, but as she was wont to do, Betty, who was no friend of the silence, breaks the stillness of the moment with a very Betty-like request. She beckons me to lean in close and she whispers, "I've never liked biscuits and gravy, but I love your biscuits and gravy. Will you go make me some?" "I'm on it, Betty Bop," I reply, and then I pray and give her a kiss on the forehead. I wipe a tear from her cheek and offer a whispered, "I love you," as I turn to leave. As I sojourned through the intensive care unit waiting room, I try to pay attention to everything and everyone around me. There is an unspoken communion in the ICU, a silent, tacit acknowledgement that all of us share and bow before the same truth. Waiting rooms are the great equalizers. Princes, paupers, heads of state, homeless, wards of the state, all of us are brought low before the bar of brokenness. We stare into the abyss of the unknown, awash in the sacred power of the moment. 3 chairs away from me in the ICU, a 30-year-old guy, his mother softly sobbing on his shoulder, stiffens his spine as the doctor talks. He is just 60 seconds away from becoming the de facto head of the family, because that's how quickly life changes. Huddled in the corner, a family clings to each other tightly, even as they cling tightly to the promise their preacher is reading from his handheld prayer book. In death as well as in life, nothing can separate us from the love of God. I walk past an open door near the elevators. I hear a mother filled with rage, a daughter filled with resignation. "Get me out of here," screams the mom. "Mom, you know you can't leave," says the daughter. The expletives flow, followed by those soul-crushing words from mother to child. "You know, you're not worth a flip. You never have been. You are a sorry human being. No wonder you can't hold down a job." I want to believe it was the fog of dementia talking, but my instincts after 30 years doing this tell me otherwise. At the elevators, I offer a prayer. I pray for peace, for an embittered mother, for no lasting scars, for an embattled daughter. I walk slowly through the halls. I study the waiting room faces. Some folks sleep in chairs. Some tuck themselves away in a corner, if only for one moment of rest and reflection on what comes next. I survey the sounds and the silence, and God is teaching me if I will just pay attention. Prayers of thanksgiving are interspersed with prayers of lament. They are the siren songs I hear. Thank you for healing. Thank you for what Grandpa taught us about you, O God. Lord, save my child. The prayers, the petitions are raw, uniquely authentic. And I'm reminded of how much joy, pain, doubt, and hope are intermingled for hospital families. Really for all families. As I descend the hill towards the hospital parking lot, I pay attention to the thoughts God is bringing me, and as I get into my Jeep, I close my eyes and ponder. I marinate in one question. What's the lesson, God? What is it? And I write down the answer that I get. Time is a gift. How you spend it really does matter. Words are so important. How you say them matters. And for Christ's sake, say them. Everybody you see, everybody you know is carrying a burden and facing a battle that you know nothing about. You can take that truth to the bank. And it is our job to pay attention to all of this. And in the words of Laura Eshelman, to see and hear someone's pain, to be one glimmer in their darkness. They're not earth-shattering revelations, but more often than not, we ignore them, much to our great peril. I've long drawn strength from the late Pulitzer Prize-winning author Reynolds Price. In his book, A Whole New Life, which I could put on your required reading list if I would, he wrote the book in his mind initially while he was in the hospital after undergoing excruciating surgery for a spinal cord tumor and then facing paralysis from the waist down. I want you to listen to the honest ferocity of his words, which echoes the sentiment C.S. Lewis shares in his letter to Sheldon Van Auken on the front of your bulletin today. Wonder if you would ponder what these words might mean, not only for your life, but also for the life of our church. Reynolds Price says this: "From where I've been, 3 facts stand at the head of any advice I'd convey to a friend confronted with grave illness or any other physical trauma. You're in your present calamity alone, number 1, as far as this life goes. If you want a way out of the problem, you got to dig it yourself. No one can rescue you from the depths of your own mind. Generous people are waiting to give you everything on earth but your one desire, which is simply to be the person you used to be. But you are not that person now. Who will you be tomorrow? Who will you be from here to your grave, which may be hours or decades down the road? Grieve for a time," he says, "over whatever parts of your old self you know that you'll miss. Have a hard cry, if the tears will even come. Then staunch the grief by whatever legal means possible. Find your way to the next viable you, a stripped down, whole other person. Your spouse, your kids, your friends, anyone who loved you in your old life will be hard at work to revive your old self. Their motives are admirable, but their care is often a handbrake on the way that you must go. If you don't discover the next incarnation of who you must be and become that person at a stiff trot, you'll be no good whatever to the ruins of your old self. The kindest thing anyone could have done for me once I'd finished radiation would have been to look me square in the eye in the hospital bed and say this: the old you is dead. Now, who will you be tomorrow? Who can you be? How can you get there double time? As cruel and unusable as it might have sounded in the wake of trauma, its truth would have won my attention far sooner than I managed to find it myself. I've made it clear, he concludes, the single vision that offered me healing was the one word I got from God. When I asked God, when I pleaded with God, what now? He whispered the word, more. If belief in a creator who notices his creatures is available to you, you may want to focus on the absolute first question to ask him or ask her. Not why me, but what next? Your chance of rescue from any despair lies, if it lies anywhere, in your decision to abandon the death watch by the corpse of your old self and to search out a new inhabitable body. Paraplegia and its maddening limits has forced a degree of patience and watchfulness on me, though as a writer, I'd like to think I'd always been watchful. Shortly after my paralysis, I heard two of Franklin Roosevelt's sons say the primary change in their dad after polio struck him in midlife was an increased patience and a willingness to listen. As I survived the frustration of so many new forms of powerlessness, I've learned to sit and to pay attention far more closely than I have in 5 previous decades. I write 6 days a week. The books are different from what came before in more ways than just age. My writing now comes down the arm of a grateful man. Increased patience, a willingness to listen. They are the lessons that perhaps only the hospital and the waiting room can teach. You know, I've not been sleeping well lately. I've even tried listening to my old sermons since they're usually a good cure for insomnia. So I've caught some late night episodes of really one of the best series to ever grace a television set, MASH. I heard a money quote this week in an episode about 2:30 in the morning entitled Blood Brothers. After trying his hardest to impress visiting Cardinal James Reardon by cleaning up the acts of the miscreants of the 407 7th and then writing a killer sermon on top of that, the unit chaplain, whom we all know as Father Mulcahy, gets frustrated at the unit's sinful behavior. They insist on playing poker and chugging tequila right after getting paid. But then the good father encounters a terminally ill soldier played by none other than a very young Patrick Swayze, who is willing to risk his life by delaying treatment for his cancer just so he can donate blood and help out a friend in need. Father Mulcahy is touched by the moment. He stays up all night talking to the soldier, comforting him, praying for him about his illness. He never writes a sermon. When he gets up to preach in front of the visiting cardinal, who is clad in his finest vestments, while the father is unshaven and wearing a bathrobe in which to preach, he stumbles for his words before finally hitting his stride and just explaining the situation. I have to admit, Father Mulcahy says, I'm not as prepared as I'd like to be. I'm not even as dressed as I'd like to be. I was working on my sermon, which I hope would be particularly inspirational in honor of Cardinal Reardon. But I was called away, and I never got back to it. If you'll just bear with me, I'd like to share with you the reason why, he said. The camera then pans to a fuming, really ticked off Cardinal Reardon before returning to Father Mulcahy. I want to tell you about two men, the father says, each facing his own crisis. The first man you know rather well. The second is a patient here. The first man thought he was facing a crisis. What he was really doing was try to impress somebody. He was looking for recognition, for a pat on the back. Whenever that recognition seemed threatened, he reacted rather childishly. He blamed everyone for his problems but himself, because he was thinking only of himself. The second man was confronted with perhaps the greatest crisis mortal man can face, the impending loss of his own life. The second man had every right to be selfish, but instead he chose not to think of himself, but of his brother. And when the first man saw the dignity and the selflessness of the second man, he realized how petty and selfish he, rather I, had been. All of which made me see something, Father Mulcahy says, more clearly than I've ever seen it before. God didn't put us on this earth for a pat on the back. He created us so he could be here himself, so he could exist in the lives of those that he created in his image. Well, drop the freaking mic, Father Mulcahy. We are here so God can be here himself. From the waiting room of the Mobile Army Surgical Hospital, we learn timeless truth. The gist of this sermon was born from a text message I got from the president of my fan club out east, a feisty soul from Wrightsville Beach, North Carolina, named Shirley Anderson. Shirley was a glass ceiling breaker moving up to the C-suite in the 1970s to vice president of human resources at Body Noel, which is the big Hardee's, Carl Jr.'s, to you guys out here, franchisee in North Carolina. Shirley is unabashed in her fangirling for me. She's the kind of soul who, were I to get caught robbing a bank, would say, I am sure he needed the money. Shirley is now and has always been concerned with the temperature of the world. And to be sure, y'all, fire burns everywhere in the Middle East, in the House, in the Senate, in the streets of so many places, in the homes of so many people, in the hearts of so many men and women. Shirley feels like she is in a waiting room longing for a diagnosis, some healing, some hope. Her text to me was pretty simple at one level. To the best minister ever, I thought of a quote and immediately said, oh, what Pastor Bob could do with this. Can't we all just get along? By Rodney King. If you're inspired to do a sermon on it, please keep me in the loop. Surely you're in the loop. Love, Shirley. I have superpowers, dear Shirley, but that is beyond my pay grade. But I will tell you what is not above my pay grade, or yours, Shirley, or all of yours. I redirect you for a hot second to Ron Patterson, who for many years was the senior pastor at Naples United Church of Christ. Between 1608 and 1638, he says, Protestants and Catholics fought the 30 Years' War because they both believed the other side didn't know the truth about Jesus. 8 million people died because Catholics and Protestants decided the way of Jesus justified killing one another to make their way the only way. Do you suppose that's what Jesus intended? In the year 1000, an army of Western Christians ransacked Constantinople, the capital city of the Eastern Christians, because one side used leavened bread in communion and the other side used unleavened. Thousands of people dead because of yeast or the lack thereof in the communion bread. Do you think that's what Jesus meant when he said, "This is my body broken for you"? Here's what I know, he said. I can't sort out the complexities that drive people to deny the humanity of other people. I can't solve the crisis in the Middle East. All I can do is get my heart, my head, my hands around the words of Jesus. I can love my neighbor. I can honor the image of God that I bear. If I only believe in a God who is some distant being out there, then I can get away with all sorts of nasty behavior towards the person next door. But here's the gospel truth. God is my neighbor. You are my neighbor. The person who disagrees with me is my neighbor. Even the person who hates and behaves terribly is my neighbor. And despite the fact that I have trouble saying it and often more trouble believing it, that person is my neighbor and they bear the very image of God. That is the theory. So how do we put it into practice? I don't think it works long distance. I don't think it works when you and I wring our hands lamenting how awful things are. So here's what we have to do. Turn off MSNBC. Turn off Fox. Leave your echo chamber. Find someone who disagrees with you and take him or her to lunch. Befriend someone who follows a different faith. Start practicing your own faith so it shows. God didn't put us here for a pat on the back. He created us so he could be here himself, so he could exist in the lives of those he created in his image. He put us here to practice what the Apostle Paul preaches in Ephesians 4. Watch the way you talk. Say only what helps. Each word a gift. Mark Jacobs was walking home from school one day in 7th grade, as he tells it, when he noticed the boy ahead of him had tripped and dropped all the books he was carrying, along with 2 sweaters and a baseball bat, a glove, and a small tape recorder. Mark knelt down and helped the boy pick up the scattered articles, and since they were going the same way, he helped the young man carry his stuff. As they walked, Mark discovered the boy's name was Bill Angstadt, that Bill loved video games, that he loved baseball and history, but that other than history, he was having lots of trouble with his other subjects like math, and that he had just broken up with his girlfriend. They arrived at Bill's house first. Bill invited Mark in for a Coke to play some PlayStation. They laughed. They shared some small talk. Mark went home. They saw each other around school, had lunch together once or twice, then graduated from junior high school. They ended up in the same high school where they had brief contact over those 4 years. Finally, their long-awaited senior year came, and 3 weeks before graduation, Bill asked Mark if they could talk. Bill reminded him of the day 6 years prior when they had first met. Did you ever wonder why I was carrying so many things home that day? Said Bill. You see, I cleaned out my locker because I didn't want to leave a mess for anyone else. I'd stored away a bunch of my mother's sleeping pills. I was going home for good. But after we spent some time together talking and laughing, I realized that if I left this world, I would have missed that time. So many others that might follow. When you picked up my books that day, Mark, you did so much more. You saved my life. To see and hear someone's pain, to be a glimmer in their darkness, to pick up a book, to say hello. God created us not for a pat on the back, but so he could be here himself. So he could exist in the lives of those he created. Watch how you talk this week. Say only what helps. Each word a gift. When you do that, you save someone's life. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen.